I think we're about ready to get started. Man in the back is giving me a signal. Yep. Well, first of all, thank you very much, everyone, for coming by here. It's a pleasure to see so many people willing to still sit here in the afternoon. I know we're dragging on a bit in the day. You've heard a lot of interesting talks already. So I'm hoping that I can keep you entertained for the next 50 or so minutes. And if nothing else, you'll get a quick recap in the beginning and you can run off somewhere else. So it's coming. My name is Louis Hansen. In case it's not bleedingly obvious, I'm a consultant. And I am on Twitter, where I ramble about inane things, sometimes security and sometimes development related. I work primarily as a .NET developer, and I'm from Sweden. And I suppose that as a .NET developer, that makes me stand out a bit, actually, because there seems to be a lot of Java people around here. Am I wrong in that? No? Just me? Okay. So let's start with the first thing. What's the point about learning security? Or rather, what's the point of this talk? Because I was asked to give a talk about what it's meant for me to move from being a purely backend developer and over into learning about security and how security and development are connected and how that changes our sort of way of reasoning about things. And the first thing I want to say is that what I hope to do with this talk is maybe inspire some developers to start looking at security and what it means for how they develop things. I'm also hoping that this can be some first steps on the road to actually learning more about security. And there's going to be a long journey if you really want to do that, and we're going to come into some of those things, but this could be a starting point if you want to be it. And even if you're not wanting to be full-time into security, then I'm hoping that some of these resources can be interesting for you anyway. What this is not a comprehensive list of all the resources you will ever need, because not a chance that's going to work out. This is not an excuse to slag off on the developers or the security people. I do want to do that, but I'm going to try and not do that in this talk. There's blame enough to go around on all sides of that table. And this, unfortunately, is not easily replicable, because I understand that I have had a very unique introduction into security, and that's not going to be something that works for everybody or is possible for everybody. If some of this stuff does work for you, or if it is possible for you, then I hope that you would be interested in doing it as well. So, the really short version, so that you can run off somewhere else if this isn't for you, security is really, really rough to get into. And by that, I don't mean just starting to learn a bit about it. I mean actually wanting to work in security can be a really rough start. There are a ton of challenges in security and in working with security, both from the perspective of a security developer or the perspective from working purely security. And it is a substantial mental shift from being just a developer. Now, there's no such thing as just a developer because everybody has their specializations, but working in security requires you to start thinking about things in a way that, at least for me personally, was completely alien in a lot of ways. It's changing how we reason about a lot of things. So, with that out of the way, you've all been given the chance to run off and see Trisha Gee, who's also talking right now. Why did I get into security? Come on. No. The first thing that you always think about is, it sounds really cool. We get all of these things from Hollywood and whatnot telling us about hackers and awesome things, and that just seemed like something that could be super interesting. I had the good fortune that there was a security expert who came and gave a couple of lectures at a place where I was consulting. I got to sit in on those, and it just, the work seemed really cool. But then I figured out that it was nothing like I thought it would be. I was like, yeah, we're going to write cool, programs, and we're going to hack the thing. And it's like, nope. No. There's documents. There's lots of documents. There's spreadsheets too, but there's lots of documents. But one of the reasons also why I got into security is I saw it as a big challenge. I saw it as something that would be a different thing for me to do, and one of the sort of guiding points in my career has been I like learning new things. I expect a lot of you do as well, and I like getting into challenges. And with security, you can have challenges that are probably new to you in where you are now, but isn't necessarily new to the industry. It's kind of like picking up an older programming language. I had a couple of years back, I picked up VBA programming. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. But, it was an interesting challenge. So that's why I started then. Why do I stay in security? Again, one of the big things is that it has really changed how I look at things. I don't view creating, writing code, and designing software the same way that I used to do. I've had to change how I think about things. I've had to actually start thinking about what is the impact of this, not just the intended impact, but the unintended impact as well. What are the consequences of the things we're building? And in an age right now where privacy is becoming a bigger and bigger concern, having developers that start thinking more about security is only a good thing. I've talked at a previous conference as well about how responsibility and ethics are also things for software developers to start looking into, and security has been an eye-opener for me in that perspective. It's a constant challenge. I mean, there is never a day that goes by where you're not going to find a new thing to challenge you, whether it's from a purely technical perspective that there will be new software or new systems coming out that need to be secured, or whether it's that your current systems need to be secured against new threats, whether it's new exploits or things that happen. And it's something that can affect you from every level of your stack, from hardware to software to people. It's also something that has let me focus on that something is solved and not necessarily how it is solved. Because as developers, we can often get tied into we want to use this cool new framework to solve this. That's the how of it. Okay, but what are we solving with it? And security often forces you to step back and say, what is the problem you want to solve? It doesn't matter how you solve it. Well, sometimes it does. But mostly you have to solve it somehow. And like I said, one of the other really cool things is that I get to work in a space where the digital really interacts with the physical. This comes into play in a lot of ways, such as, hey, do people remember to lock their laptops? And so what does that mean for our data security? Or it's been looking into lockpicking. That is fantastically fun. I can highly recommend it. If you haven't tried it, go find tutorials, something. It's amazing. But it's a space where that becomes a lot more relevant and where physical things can really impact your digital solutions in a way that you haven't previously thought about. Some people who are working in UX and in performance-related areas also see this to a degree, so it's not unique to security, but it has definitely been one of the things that has intrigued me working in it. So now we've got past all that. What does security actually do? And there's a number of different things here we can look into. The first of it is, and this is for me mostly, but also generally, has been doing code reviews. I know that might sound really dull, but it's actually a really great way for security to help development and make sure that you are offloading some of that mental strain, and I'll come back to that in a bit as well, but doing those things to help your departments move forward. There's framework and architecture design. Being able to, as a security person, start helping to design a framework that'll let developers work within it without having to fear that they are going to build something that's going to cause issues. So the more we can set up a sandbox that people can work within, well, the better, because it's just, creativity. There are so many creative solutions in software. Why wouldn't we want to foster that more? But we want to also do it in a secure way. There's things like threat modeling, which is, in essence, a really fancy way of saying we want to slap stuff up on a whiteboard and start thinking about what that means and how our data flows are actually vulnerable to things. What do we need to think about and care about? And that one actually has another little side effect that I'll come into in a moment. Security reviews, and not to be confused with code reviews, but security reviews is often more on the lines of, hey, can we actually work with this third-party supplier? Will they treat our data in a responsible way? What are their policies on data retention and their access to our information and so on? So that is a key component that we, in an age where we are so often used to pulling in packages from NPM and other similar module sites, how much do we actually know about what they do with our systems and what that means? And starting to look into those things, and again, offloading that bit from your colleagues can be a huge boon. There is policy creation, and this is a lot more on the information security side or InfoSec, but this is everything from everybody must lock their computers to, hey, let's have proper size passwords, to maybe we should actually review the access logs of our system and make sure that people aren't doing bad things. And there's also the implementation of said policies. And these are some of the things that you'll find security doing, but it is by far not everything. If you want to talk more about interesting points like that, then I'm happy to have discussions on that afterwards. So what has it meant for me, being a part of a team? What do I actually contribute? Well, one of the things is, like I said, it's a new perspective. It's a different way of looking at things that I didn't have as just a backend developer. And excuse me when I say just a backend developer, I mean that I was focused on making sure that my APIs were designed correctly, that my database interactions were working like they should, and these things. And I wanted to build code that was performant and maintainable and all of those things that we want to do. But the fact that there may not have been as much validation wasn't really a concern for me. And that shifted for me. It also shifted who the consumers of my system are, how much I need to care about that. And being able to offer that perspective in a sprint meeting or something similar has been hugely beneficial for me and for the teams I've worked in. I get to ask a lot of annoying questions. And I love that. Because you get to sit there and you're like, have we thought about this? Do we care about that? The do we care about is actually a question that I use a lot. And it is incredibly powerful because it forces people to just say, yes, this is something that we want to deal with, or no, we don't care. But as soon as somebody actually raises the question, then we can design around it and then move on if need be. There's also the guerrilla documentation, and this is the threat modeling I was talking about, because a lot of teams, we really want to do architecture documentation and system maps and data flows. We just don't always get them down on paper. So they're sitting around in a lot of talented people's heads where they are really hard to transfer, especially if, God forbid, that person gets hit by a bus. Now, one of the things when we start looking at things like threat modeling is that it forces us to have some picture on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper or something that we can reason about multiple people at the same time, and then just grabbing a picture of that and, hey, we've got some documentation. Woo! And like I said, one of the key things is also, of course, freeing up other people in the team. It can be anything from doing the menial stuff like code reviews and such to making sure that, well, you don't have to worry about how to build that validation logic. I'll take care of having a framework around it that you can work within, and then, hey, that's solved. Means that other people can focus on creative solutions that'll bring value to the business or be a cool solution for the users. So, that's a question that sometimes comes up. Do I even write code anymore? It depends a lot. I have had an assignment recently that lasted for about a year. I think I wrote a grand total of 500 lines of code. So kind of like some architects don't get to write a lot of code either, it varies a tremendous amount. But it also depends a lot on which part of security you're working within. When you're heavily in information security, then no, you will write very little code, unless you're the ones designing the actual frameworks and such, and then you're starting to move more over into technical security. But where do we start if we actually want to learn security? Well, first you need to learn how to bring coffee. And I know that one is a bit hard to read, but there's a lovely little inscription on the bottle. But the simplest thing is find somebody who knows security and then learn from them. Finding a mentor is a key thing if you actually want to learn security. However, that is not the easiest thing in the world, so where do you start? There are probably local user groups in your area, and those are usually a great resource for knowledgeable people who want to share their expertise and who can help you move forward in this. If there isn't, then one of the things you can look at is OWASP. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware of OWASP. They do a top 10 list of the worst security issues every year, or rather they update it almost yearly. And they have some fantastically beginner-friendly forums where the moderators do fight a rough battle to keep them beginner-friendly. So if you want to find a hopefully good place to learn online, then I can definitely recommend that. There's also a Twitter hashtag that's been coming up recently called Mentoring Mondays, which was started by Tanya Yanka, who is one of the, she is a cloud security advocate for Microsoft. Works a lot with their Azure teams there. And basically the principle was really that simple. She wanted to just try and get mentors and mentees together. And I think that is an incredibly admirable goal. So if you're looking for someone, or if you already are experienced and you want to teach people, then hop on in there. Now, if you don't have a mentor, or even if you do, but you maybe just want to have a couple of book recommendations, then these are the two books that I got recommended when I first started looking into security. Threat modeling, designing for security, is a really good way to get into threat modeling as a whole. It'll let you learn about what it actually is, and it's something that even if you have no interest in moving further in security, then that can be useful to you. Like I said, this can, again, with the guerrilla documentation and stuff like that, and it can help you highlight a few simple weaknesses in your applications that you may want to think about. Did we actually consider whether we need that HTTPS certificate on, between the API and the database, for instance? The Web Application Hacker's Handbook is, like it says, web-focused. However, the reason why it's interesting is because it goes through a lot of basic examples on how you break web applications. And it's everything from how you do script injection and so on to finding out information about what a system is running. Now, the reason why the second book is interesting is because it'll teach you really simple things like, hey, if we filter out script tags on our website when we're whitelisting things, for instance, do we do it recursively? I never thought about that until I read that one, but it's like, oh yeah, wait, if we just remove it the once and then it smushes a string together, whoops, we've got a problem. It's a very attack-focused book, and it can be interesting, and I have some really good examples for you. So, my personal recommendation, and what I was recommended as well, is start with InfoSec, or information security. The reason being that it will teach you context. And context is more or less one of the most important things in security. If you don't know the greater context of what you're looking at, then you can scream about the worst cross-site scripting bug in history, and it doesn't actually matter. It can also let you guide the technical security, or it should. Again, the information security will be the ones who are setting the policies, who know what actually matters to the organization. And on that point, the business that you usually work in speaks information security. They don't speak technical security. You've probably experienced this already when you're working as a developer and you're talking to a project manager or some other stakeholder, and they're like, you're trying to explain a situation to them, and they're just like, just give it to me in words that I know. If you want to teach security to the business or speak security to the business, then information security is the place to start. Now, once we've actually gotten started, what then? Here's one of the most depressing things about security: mistakes will happen. And it's depressing in the sense that we know that we will fail. And as developers, we fail all the time. We just rarely have that many consequences for it. It's like, oh no, my code failed to compile. Okay, fix it and move on. And that's the same thing that you want to make sure that when you're starting security, that you give yourself room to make mistakes. Because suddenly you're likely in a completely different field, and you're having to reason in a different way and talk to people you might not have interacted with in the business previously. So make sure that there's room for you to fail, basically. Start small. If you are looking to contribute, then again, OWASP is a good place to start, and you can get involved with some of their open source projects, for instance. Or if you have, then a mentor is a really, really big help here. It has been a tremendous help for me personally, and like I said, this is the not quite replicable part of the presentation. You may not have access to that, but I hope you do, if you are in this area. And on that note, in security, the choices you make matter. There are things where you can be deciding how we are doing things in a business that can cause fines that will put a business out of, that will put us out of business. It can be things that you are part of designing systems that could literally be life or death, and security there can be a paramount thing. So with that, and with the fact that we know we're going to fail, we're like I said, there's room for a really rough start there. However, and now I want to contradict myself a lot, you want to not be Chicken Little. Now, most of you are British, I'm guessing. Does Chicken Little exist in the UK as well? Because I've been hammered with this from someone who's from the US. Basically, Chicken Little is the one who runs around, gets hit on the head with something and screams, "Oh my God, the sky is falling, the sky is falling," and is causing up quite the panic and stir, and basically screaming his lungs out, and nobody quite really wants to believe them. And that's the thing you're going to experience as well, is that if you're running around screaming the sky is falling, oh no, we have the world's most critical cross-site scripting bug, so what? Does that matter? Do we care? I mean, it is a genuine question to ask in a business. Do we care that this is a problem? Do we care that our backups might fail? Do we care that our logs might not catch everything? There's a really key difference between the public and the private version of this, with that being, I'm not talking about like public as in government, I'm talking public as in the PR spokesperson. You'll never get a PR spokesperson to go out and say, we don't care about security, or we don't care about this part of security. But you're definitely gonna have inside your house or inside your company people who are like, yeah, no, this isn't the thing. This is not an issue. Does this thing that we're looking at, does it put the core business value at risk? And this is one of those ways where we can figure out whether we care. Does this affect stuff like our brand? I mean, that could be a major thing. If a security risk, if we are heavily reliant on our website and our brand there, and somebody can actually go in and manipulate the stuff on our website, that can make us look really bad. That can be hugely damaging. But if all we're offering is a couple of DLLs, then we don't really care about somebody who might have changed the logo on our webpage. That's not an issue. Does this put our data at risk? And by that I mean anything we might hold about our customers or key things that are affecting how we design, for instance, our algorithms or things like that. Does this put our intellectual property at risk? And again, here it's like, these are things that you have to answer not just on a company-by-company basis, but actually on a case-by-case basis. Because what can in one project be an immense problem and really be that the sky is falling can not matter at all to another project. So even though I just told you that in security choices really matter, then it's something that has to be balanced against this. Another thing is also what users are affected. Not just how many users, but which users. I guarantee you that if you have a problem that affects the CEO of your company, and it's just that one person being affected, then that will be much higher priority than a problem that affects maybe your entire support staff. Unfortunately, that is, the reality of it. And what's it going to cost to fix this problem? That's another key thing when we're looking at dealing with security. Security is unfortunately one of those things, like quality and like performance, that we like to shove under the rug until it becomes a problem. And most people, you won't find a company that says we don't care about security. Like I said, from a public perspective, we all care. But from a private perspective, let's put our money somewhere else. Let's put it on acquiring new users or building new features, because those are also important. So what's it going to cost to fix this problem? And what's the smallest possible fix to a problem? This is actually one of the things that I've personally been struggling a lot with when it comes to learning security is, does this require, and as my mentor likes to say it, a 600-year spaceship solution? That is basically I'm building the biggest possible technical solution and it will take about 600 years to complete it. Or can we just put a post-it note on a server and say, don't touch this? Because sometimes that's all it takes to fix a problem. or a script that automatically reboots a service every day or something like that. So when we're looking at, oh my God, this is a huge flaming issue, is it? And sometimes it is, and then we need to do something about it. There's an old saying that's called, for want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the message was lost. For want of a message, the battle was lost. For want of battle, or for the loss of the battle, the war was lost. All because of the loss of a shoe. And what that illustrates to me is that in security, a lot of the things we should really care about aren't the big flashy exploits that you'll hear all about on Twitter or everywhere else. It's basic security hygiene. It's stuff like, do we actually make sure that we, change our passwords or store them in a good manner? Do we encrypt our data? Do we make sure that we don't, leave stuff lying completely open to everybody on the internet? If that's not a problem for us, then great. But these basic things will matter so much more to most companies than the really big name exploits will. So a lot of security is about dealing with risks. And the word risk is very specifically chosen there because it's not necessarily, like I said, it's not necessarily a problem. But it could be that we don't care about the risk, and it can also be that it never actually happens. Something that can completely destroy our company but only happens if there are 3 Thursdays in a month, well, that's not really an issue, is it? Unfortunately, you do also have those situations where systems design has risks that are known but not really cared about because when is that ever going to happen? Like, say, when I believe it was Japan who recently lost their emperor, and that means that their calendars now need to be redone, which affects every single IT system they have built. There's actual talk about switching over to the Gregorian calendar because of the massive impact that this has on their IT systems. It's like, well, that's never going to be a problem. Oh, wait. So risks are a thing, and how we deal with them. There's a very popular saying, and I do appreciate the sentiment, but I also have grown to really despise that saying, and that is that there is no patch for human stupidity. And the reason why this is so very true is, we're always going to have situations where people are going to do things in a way that we didn't expect. It's like, nobody's ever going to do that. There's also another aspect of that, and that's the aspect of scale. If you have a 1 in a million issue, that's fine if you have 10 users. But if you're Facebook, 1 in a million happens about once a minute, I think I've heard some of those statistics. So scale is also important there. But there is no patch for human stupidity has a tendency to blame the users. And it's so easy in security to start saying, oh, why did the stupid user click the link? Well, it's a link. It's meant to be clicked. So it's one of the reasons why I want to say that the users are never the problem. The solution is the problem. And by that I mean, if we can't actually click on links that we get sent in an email, what's the point? If I have to sit here and be so paranoid about anybody, stealing my phone that I can't use it, I have to leave it locked away in a cage at home, what's the point? If the solution can't work in real life, why have it? And it's one of the things that security tends to do really badly at times. They get so focused on the, oh my God, this terrifying exploit needs this amazing blockchain solution. I don't like blockchain, I'm sorry. But we have to sort of figure out, well, if this doesn't actually work in real life, then what's the point? At the end of the day, we're building things to make sure that the business can work better. We're not just, the most secure server in the world is one that's not hooked up to anything. Great, you've got a computer in a corner. What does that help? This is a phrase that I have gotten literally burned into my mind. Help, help, my house is on fire. Now, a couple of years ago, I was working at a contract, and like I said, I have had the good fortune to be working with a mentor for most of my career. And there was a new problem that was affecting, I believe it was the SQL Server or something like that. And I had been looking into it and was like, okay, this is a problem. Sky is falling. Keep that bit in mind. But I was going to go over and talk to the developers like, oh my God, this is a big issue. We really have to fix this. And I was hammering on about all of the details about, this is a really, really, really big problem. And I got nowhere with it. And then I walked back to my boss there and was like, I've been trying to explain this issue and they don't care. They don't want to fix it. And she just looked at me and she was like, help, my house is on fire. And I was like, that's a really weird thing to say. I mean, I'm trying to explain a problem here, We've got this thing. It's a big problem. Technical details, all of the details. She looks at me again and goes, help, my house is on fire. I'm like, what? It's like, you idiot. Help, my house is on fire. What does that mean? Does anybody here not know what my house is on fire means? No. Did anybody have a clue what I was talking about? Absolutely not. Because I was talking technical details and lots of different jargon, and it's just like, this doesn't help anyone. Nobody knows what I'm trying to say. So, when you're looking at when you're in security, one of the biggest issues that you will often be faced with is figuring out how to communicate the problem. And I know we experience that as developers as well, but a lot of the time, quite frankly, we are shielded by project managers and others that let us build the features, and then the technical details are sometimes, at least to the rest of the business, irrelevant. So one of the things we really need to know when we're looking at security is, who are we talking to? Do you know the person that you're actually talking to? What is their background? Do you use the same words? I know this sounds really stupid, and even if you're speaking, the same language, if you're speaking English or German or whatever your language is, are you actually using the same words? Because working as a consultant, I get to see a lot of different companies, and the same word does not mean the same thing at different places. Stuff like, what does a sprint retrospective mean? That's vastly different from company to company. So what makes you think that when you say this word, then your CFO or your legal advisor or somebody else knows what you mean? What do they care about? What matters to them? Does it matter to them that some bit of validation might be failing? Maybe, maybe not. Again, figure it out, because if you don't know what they care about, then how are you ever going to make them care about your security problem? And how does this impact them? That's, again, a key thing. If you have a team of front-end developers and back-end developers, well, something that's related to how we parse our JavaScript and why that can cause issues, back-end developers aren't going to care. It's not going to affect them. But if we're suddenly talking about how there was an issue with serialization and deserialization of objects in Java a couple of years back, which was a really big security issue, but I mean, for most people, didn't matter. And the only developers who cared were the back-end developers who were actually impacted there. So again, does this actually impact them? And what happens if they don't fix it? What happens if they don't do this thing you want them to do, or change this thing you want them to change? Is the house going to burn down? Is it going to cause a massive problem that cannot be fixed? Is it going to cause an immense legal fine? Or is it just going to be, a little red checkbox somewhere on a compliance list? Now, once we actually want to look into building security, one of the key things we want to do is we want to try and strike a balance. Like I said earlier, having the most secure server in the world sitting completely disconnected in a corner isn't going to help anyone. So what is the solution that we can come up with that actually benefits the company from a security perspective without hampering everybody's ability to do their work? How do we educate people on security? can we go out and start talking to developers? And again, I'm hoping that this can inspire some of you to want to learn more about it. But what can I do in my team to make sure that security knowledge is actually something that we have? And a really unfortunate thing is that culture eats policy for breakfast. And you've all proven this at one point or another because you've had a password and then you've changed it, and the way you've changed it is you put a number at the end of it. And then when it was time to change it again, you increased the number. Yeah, exactly. Ooh, that's even better. And that's the problem, is that if we set down a lot of rules about this is how things must be to be secure, great. I don't care. Why should I care about that? Well, you should care because it's going to affect our users and it's going to be important for our business and these things. Okay, well then we can start looking at having a culture that actually talks about the need for security and the value of security. But if the only thing you have is somebody going around with a clipboard saying, no, that's not good enough, and that's not good enough. Oh, no, unlock computer. Somebody did a bad thing. What's that going to help? Nothing. Now, I've been places where unlocked computers meant that you had to give the head of security candy, and that suddenly had an impact because people were like, oh, no, wait, somebody left an unlocked computer, candy for the security person. And it's a little thing, but it actually helps people understand and appreciate that these things are, well, important. And it gets everybody involved in a fun way without damaging everybody else. So a couple of things that I want to tap on here at the end is one of the interesting things about security is when you look at going international. Now, I don't know how many of you work for companies where you have users in multiple countries. And it's not just having a deployment that can go out to users in a different country, but what does it actually mean for your company to operate in a different country? Does it have an impact? Are you allowed to store data? I mean, GDPR has been one of those really big examples where we've all had to learn the value of fun checkboxes and sliders everywhere. But it also meant that we suddenly have to start thinking about where do we store our data? Are we storing it in an appropriate location in this cloud provider? Are we allowed to use this region instead of that region? And what does that mean when we want to start looking at other countries? And there's I don't know if we're talking about Brexit, are we? No? Yes? Maybe? No, but Brexit is actually a fantastic example of it because until it happens, the UK is still part of the EU. So all of the regular, you can store your data within the EU and access it and stuff like that. That's fine. But what happens if that's no longer the case? Do you need to suddenly move all of your data centers? Are you suddenly in a position where there will be entirely new laws applying to you? And for this specific case, nobody knows. Nobody has a clue. But it could be something that's going to affect you. I'm not saying that this is something you need to go and research, but from a security perspective, it's a really fascinating thing because here is something that may come and bite us really hard or not. And this is back to the risk thing. Well, does this actually happen? Who knows? How much do we need to build for it now? Well, maybe some or not at all. So on that note, and with a little bit of extra time to spare to go get coffee, I want to say thank you all very much for coming. And if you have any questions, then feel free to ask.